According to the Federal Register, in 2014, a year in prison cost about $30,619, which is more than the average yearly cost at a four-year public college. All of us here will eventually pay taxes, and none of us know exactly where this money will end up. I researched the cost of prison to find out exactly how much is being spent and to look for ways in which it could be spent elsewhere. I'm going to talk today about the cost of prison, what that money goes towards, and how state governments can lower the bill. I'm going to start with the contributions to the cost and the factors that play into it, and then I'm going to talk about the reasons for the cost being so high. And then finally, the difference between short and long-term changes. First, I'm going to talk about the overall cost of prison. The cost of prison per inmate adds up in the end and it creates an unimaginable budget. Incarceration costs add up from a multitude of things. The Society pages cites that the major cost comes from placing adults in prisons and children in detention centers. This chart shows about some of the, it's specific to California, but it shows the different categories in which money is spent in most prisons, which includes security, transport, records, psychiatric care, food, education, and religious activities. The article also sources costs in monitoring and supporting those on parole. According to the Society pages, California's average incarceration cost is about $49,000, but about $5,000 of this goes straight to managing parole, while the other $44,000 goes to other incarceration fees. The cost of prison has a lot more factors than just dealing with prisoners themselves. While the Federal Register places the average cost at about $30,000, certain states put a lot more money towards prison than others. In 2013, Iowa was slightly above the national average at about $32,925, according to the National Institute of Corrections. However, at the same time, Kentucky was the lowest paying at about $15,000, and New York was the largest at about $60,000. According to an article written by Stephen Hawkins in American Prospect, nationwide cost is roughly about $70 billion, which comes from placing adults in prisons and juveniles in detention centers, and it supervises the 7.3 million people on parole. First, I talked about the overall cost, and next I'm going to show you what some of the things the cost can be attributed to. There are many things that add up to the cost of incarceration. Prison population has increased dramatically from what it once was. Hawkins' article in the American Prospect says that in 1980, prison population was about 500,000, compared to the 2.3 million in 2010. Hawkins also points out that in the United States, makes up about 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. Prison costs cover more than just feeding and housing. In an article in the New York Times written by Mark Santora, who's a former city correction and probation commissioner, he claims that prisons are highly overstaffed. In New York, there's a 2-to-1 guard to inmate ratio, or inmate to staff ratio, in which staff are paid wages, benefits, and pension. And Santori even points out that 83% of the total cost goes towards the staff. There's a large portion of the cost that goes towards the reentry of prisoners, and most can't end up making it in the real world, so they end up resorting to crime to live. Conrad Moore, a lawyer and writer for the Los Angeles Times, makes it impossible to not question petty crimes when it comes to cost. He talks about states with a 3-strike policy, which gives a repeat offender 3 different strikes before they're given an automatic sentence of 25 years to life. In these states, prisoners are usually given the maximum sentence for crimes that don't usually require much jail time at all, which racks up unnecessary costs. First, I talked about the total cost of incarceration, then I talked about the attributions to cost. Finally, I'm going to talk to you about ways to curb prison spending. Incarcerating criminals adds up, but there are certain ways in which the government can decrease the bill. There aren't many immediate ways to cut spending for an instant result. The number of guards could be decreased, and states could set a standard inmate-to-guard ratio, but the main concern is safety. According to an article in the Merced Sun-Star, a 22-year-old prison guard was murdered due to the Atwater prison in California being understaffed. Jose Rivera was returning 100 prisoners to their cell alone when 2 of the prisoners turned and stabbed him. Rivera worked at a prison with a 1-to-4 guard ratio, but was assigned to take the prisoners back himself. An officer and previous guard at the Atwater prison was interviewed anonymously and stated that if you divide the total number of people who worked there by the total number of inmates, it probably comes out to a 1-to-4 ratio, and that doesn't sound too bad, but that includes every employee. from the secretaries to the dental technicians. And not all the staff is there for every shift, obviously, but the inmates are. After 4 p.m., it's a skeleton crew. Another current employee pointed out that between 4 p.m. and 8 a.m., there are approximately 25 guards for the 1,100 inmates. Even though criminals have done something worthy of punishment, they're still humans. You can only take away so much before it becomes inhumane. They still need the basic necessities to stay alive, which will end up in a costly situation. Changing things for the long term seems to be the best way to decrease the incarceration costs. In Hawkins' article titled Education versus Incarceration, he cites NAACP research, which shows that prisoners tend to come from poor communities of color with low school performance. These neighborhoods are sources of a majority of prison populations, which is because they end up putting more money towards prison than the education. Hawkins stated that 33 of the 50 states have shown a decrease in educational spending and an increase in incarceration costs. If state governments simply make the shift to add to the educational spending, it could potentially have an effect on the prison population in the years following. Another way to lower the cost is by investing in preventing prisoners from going back to prison after being released. An article in the New York Times titled How to Cut Prison Costs asked state governments to expand community drug treatment programs, post-prison supervision, and parole systems. Another suggestion from the article is to ask employers and landlords to question the ex-prisoners' dedication to a better lifestyle, rather than to be completely deny them based on their baggage. This allows them a chance to reform their life for the better instead of resorting to a life of crime. I've talked about the cost of prison overall and the different ways that it adds up, and ways in which state governments can lower this cost. Prison isn't meant to be a luxury, but with the current cost, it might as well be. The current average incarceration cost is higher than most public colleges in the United States. Things need to be done to reform the prison system, lowering costs in a safe and effective way. Prison is free for the inmates, but that puts a large burden on the taxpayers. This country invests more in the prison system than the education of its people. And when thinking of inmates, it doesn't make sense for them to live comfortably after what they have done. When thinking of costs, does it make sense to pay for 4 years of public college or to go to a prison where everything is paid for you?